Hello, and welcome to Olmsted, the Urbanist podcast. I'm Ned Melanson. Today I'm speaking with Justin Copenhaver, software engineer and founder of Urality, a digital placemaking, wayfinding, and community storytelling app. Justin is an active member of the Olmsted Slack channel, who has a deep understanding of augmented reality, social media, and what makes towns and cities work, both in the real world as well as the digital, and, increasingly, the blend of the two. Justin and I cover a lot here, and while we travel down a few rabbit holes, including the billboard effect in augmented reality, using augmented reality to gain political support for good urban design, digital democracy, and the tyranny of the minority, fiscally sound cities, the striking lack of shame on Facebook, why tourism is a dirty word, and Justin's thoughts on the trajectory of the urbanism movement. I promise we do bring it all around in the end. So we'll dive right into Justin's description of his app, Urality. Enjoy.
Yeah. I'll give you a little bit of a historical perspective on my side. So basically when I started it, I really started it from the standpoint of as a technologist, I'm a software developer by trade. So when I started all of this, I really wanted to build something that was really focused on immersive content, in particular augmented reality, in particular location-based AR. So that's where I started this journey, was really looking at how a person could essentially pin content to the real world, content being media, audio, video, using their phone and being able to author it on site and then sharing it with others. Through the process of building that over the first 2 years or so, I really started to hone in on this vision of how we could do that for communities and have communities be able to build and share content within a geographic space, a geofence, if you will. And that's really where we've landed. Now, it's been interesting to see the transformation into how people want to use it without it feeling too salesy and markety in the grand scheme of things. We are focused on providing services to economic development, workforce development, main streets, business improvement districts to do a better job serving up hyperlocal content. And by hyperlocal, I mean, I'm standing at a location. Here are the things that are within a 5-minute walk of me. So we're trying to fuse together that idea of economic development and mobility and everything under one hood to really amplify what's going on right around you.
Why can't I do that with Apple or Google Maps right now?
It doesn't really focus on the user side of things. So, as a business, I can list my business on Google Maps or something like that, and that's fine. But you really don't get an impression of what's actually happening within that community. So it's not just about the business, but it's about the people. So we've really tried to weave in the narrative and the media side of that as part of the story when you are initially on the ground checking out what's going on. Yes, we do have that component to it of here are the local businesses, but we want to dive a level deeper than that and really focus on the storytelling aspect. And also the other side of it is the arts and culture. We also want to capture that and serve that up along with, those local businesses that you would be supporting and all the things that you can walk and bike to. When I think of my own travels, when I go somewhere and I don't have a lay of the land and I don't know much about it, I will look around and with my eyeballs, I will see buildings, I will see public art. I have no context around that. The thing that I'm lacking in that story is the context. If I see a mural, I want to know about the muralist. I want to know the story behind why that mural is there in the first place. So we're solving for serendipity from the perspective that you're going to learn more contextually about what it is that you're looking at and what you're doing in that place than if you were just doing a Google search online. And that Google search isn't really going to give you more information. Where I really see this being useful in the long term is how people can start to essentially give a more complex story behind the places that they're in, instead of it always just being a very flat, narrow, superficial version of what they're seeing. It's okay, this mural has pretty colors, but it means nothing more to me, and I just move on. Now, what would happen in our current world is that I'd take a picture standing in front of the mural, and then people would give me some thumbs up on Instagram or something like that, right? But that doesn't credit the artist at all. That doesn't give you any credence into what they were thinking when they were doing that. And so from that perspective, I want to be able to do a better job of storytelling. This really all comes back to storytelling from my perspective.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like you've mentioned a few different things here. It almost seems like it's going towards almost like an everything app for the urban experience. Is that an end goal, would you say, or is that too far off in the distance?
That is an end goal for sure. I would say from a technology perspective, one of the goals that we have is to be able to index and capture a lot of locations and the context around them, so then they can be, redisplayed on whatever sort of device that you're using. Because it's foolish to think that we're always going to have this phone brick in our hands to see the world through. I think it's important to be able to capture that from a historical perspective, but then also from a cultural perspective, because there's lots of problems with how we consume media today. And without me going too far off of a tangent, I do think that technologists have a duty to think of technology in an ethical manner and make sure that technology is applied in such a way that we're going to not disrupt the human race any more than we already have. The biggest problem that I have with technology and media as it's constructed today, it's meant to keep your attention. So instead of you walking down the street and using your senses to really take in the scene that you're surrounded by, you have your damn head in the phone. And if there's a way that we can use technology to augment and to provide more context and to give you a better sense of where you're at and why you're part of this, then that's fantastic. And that's really the goal.
Yeah. And I think we started talking about AR, augmented reality, earlier. And I think I don't want to call it like a dirty word, but it gets like, people have very like visceral reactions to it, I think. But it's like, if we're not doing AR right now just by, staring down at our phone for 5 hours a day, what is that? It's like disrupted reality. I'll call it DR. So it seems like anything that we can improve off just head down, like literally like breaking our necks, is going to be an improvement. But there seems to be like, like with like snap glasses, for instance, or the Google lenses or glasses, whatever,
Sure. Yeah. From my perspective, in the technology, I look at the solutions that people are bringing forth, and unless it has an actual utility to make your life better, it's going to be really difficult for it to stick. And so one of the things that I have a lot of concerns about in the space, specifically with AR, is the billboard effect, where you have a bunch of digital stuff flying over your face and nothing makes any sense. That will stop people from using it immediately. I think that there are some real concerns about authenticity in that environment. And I think you're already seeing some of that play out with what people are talking about in the metaverse and the way that things have been pitched in that world and where people have gravitated to. There's a definite difference between virtual reality and augmented reality. I think the things that will win in the long term are these pragmatic solutions that are going to be something that adds to the experience and simply doesn't take away too much from what it is that you're doing. There has to be some net benefit for people to care about having that. Like, here's a prime example of AR that I think is good. If you and I both did not speak English, at some point in the future, we will have glasses that, you could be speaking Italian to me, and I would see a transcription in my lens of that conversation, and vice versa. And I think that is a pragmatic technology that is a value add. Changing that into the real world in the urbanist perspective, it's like being able to look at a street and seeing, is this street safe? What are the qualities of this street that can really show that where I'm standing, where I'm walking, where I'm biking is safe for me to be there in the first place? It also allows us, and this is more on the artistic side, to really envision a different future for the cities when we start to think about that's really where some of the newer technologies that are being developed in machine learning and AI are starting to, I'm sure you've seen it on Twitter and stuff like that, where these renderings of these cities from, before and after, the after always looks beautiful because, there's no cars and it's pedestrian paradise. But to be able to do that in real time and provide that to planners, to basically anyone to envision the future, I think is a really valuable and useful experience that they can see themselves, they can do planning in that environment, and then they can demonstrate it by showing it to other people as well.
Wow. Yeah, that's really cool. Let's explore that a little bit more. So it sounds like you're saying,
Sure.
Okay, let's say I have AR glasses on. I'm walking down a street in Orlando, Florida. It sounds like you're saying if we're trying to get people on board with, let's just say, a bike lane down a 4-lane street, you would almost have it like projected into their glasses?
Yeah, so one area that we're working in is to do these digital placemaking experiences. And how I really see that evolving over time is that the city would basically put something in the scene, like an orb or something, to say like, hey, check this thing out. You would, interact with it. And then it would open a scene to tell you a story about, hey, we want to add this bike lane here, and show you what it would look like in the end. And then you could really start to weave in the narrative and say, based on this, you're going to see a speed reduction of X number miles per hour, and projected safety benefit is this percentage. It's those sort of things when you overlay that with the actual augmentation of your view that you're seeing, you can say, oh, okay, that makes sense. That bike lane should be there and it should be like that. Wouldn't it also be cool to be like, hey, do you want to make this more of a temporary bike lane, or do you want to show it with bollards? Do you want to show a barrier up between the driving road and the cycle lane? There are a lot of considerations you can make in that space without ever doing any construction, which is a planner's dream, right?
Yeah, and do you see almost like a digital democracy component to this? Would you go so far to be
Yes.
like,
Yes.
Yeah, what does that look like?
So how I view the world is that there are a lot of people who are smart, and they are smart about one thing, and they're idiots about other things. We continually roll with this concept that people are in positions of making decisions when they don't have the information or they're not the subject matter experts. We need to evolve more towards a technocratic society where people who have the knowledge and skills are the best people to chime in on these things. I think citizens and their opinions are really important, but most of the planning that happens in cities and communities now is driven by a bunch of loudmouths who show up to meetings, and too many decisions are poo-pooed or flattened by a vocal minority. So a way that you can build in a democratic process is to say, okay, we're going to put this out for review within the community. We're going to give you this portal that you can get into that tells the story of what it is that we're doing. Like, this placemaking project is going to solve X, Y, and Z. You lay it out, you give them a way to envision it, the end state essentially, and then you can take feedback from that. And that feedback's going to be much better than going to your local council meeting and listening to approval, dissent, whatever. It gives you that opportunity to make the decision without any bias. So yes, I do think that technology should be enabling democracy.
And it always has, in one way or another, from the printing press and spreading around the first propaganda to, hanging chads in the ballot machines. Like, it's always been there. So we can't really ignore it. I definitely agree with your point that the loudest mouths can control and gum up the local democratic process. And one of the major drivers of the housing crisis is just these NIMBYs, not in my backyard, voices that say, no, we can't have development here. And I was just reading via Twitter about California, but like California passed basically like a housing mandate that every town basically has to build or rezone to allow the construction of affordable housing. And they were talking about some affluent Bay Area community, I think it was called Atherton or something like that. But they're saying like, oh, don't worry about this. Don't rezone our town. I'm a lawyer. We can just sue them, and this will take 5 years before anything gets done.
It's terrible. I don't know what else to say. Like, there are so many arguments that people make against density. And I go back to the thing that has really resonated with me once I read it is Chuck Marone's Strong Towns, and you start to think about density and land value tax. And truthfully, at the end of the day, the more dense that you are, the more money that area generates, and the less you have to worry about the infrastructure and civil services that you're building around that. I think that a lot of towns should be very proactive to move forward and create density, because if they keep pushing their liabilities into the future, they're screwed.
Could you give an overview of that? Like, you mentioned land value tax, you mentioned liabilities, like what's a liability for a town? But I guess start with the land value.
Sure. So when you're talking about density, you're really talking about value per acre and the tax that can be generated off of that. Most places, if you own a home, you're paying a property tax. You're not really focused on assessed land value, but really a lot of places should be focused on assessed land value, because if they truly were, then you would be able to build larger structures, create more density, essentially build a larger tax base on that space. So cities have the advantage there. That's why a lot of cities, at least on the East Coast and where my experience, they have lower property tax values because there's just more density. Assets and liabilities. If I'm a town and I have to hire a police force and a fire department, and I have maintenance that has to be done on the roads, and there are all these things that need to happen for the town to continue to function properly. You can raise your taxes, or you can push a lot of that into the future and keep building. And I think that's been the American way. We keep building and we're not really focused on the sustainability around it. And I'm not talking environmental sustainability. I just think the check is going to come to a head at some point. And then you start seeing degradation of services, and you start thinking about these, not just the suburban areas that are outside our urban city centers, but then the exurbs that are off of that. And then folks are going to start to complain that their roads are falling apart. There's a reason for that, because we overbuilt. And I don't think that nothing is going to solve that except for density. And so you need policy changes like the ones that California is putting into place. Full circle, we have closed that part of the conversation.
We're covering a lot of ground here. That's what I like, though. I mean, it's like there's so many interweaving subjects, even though we need to make denser cities. That seems like a very simple thing, but it involves everything from digital democracy to land value taxes. So it's a seemingly simple thing with a lot of obstacles in the way, but there's a lot of tools out there too.
Yeah, and we want to be part of the tools that are responsible for doing a better job of this. We live in a capitalistic society, right? It's difficult to find people who are really wanting to build that next generation of what these tools look like. The next generation for a lot of people is like, oh, this new immersive technology, but it should be more thinking about how we take and transform the data that we have and make it more powerful for uses in the future. That's one area that I'm really focused in on.
Cool. Well, if I could elect you the head of Facebook, I would. You seem like you have your heart in the right place.
I do not want that job, my friend.
Well, here's to Urality's growth then. And I do want to go back to Urality. It's interesting to me. I think I'm still trying to grasp it. If you could walk me through, like, what's an ideal use case for me, Urality? Let's say I'm sitting in my apartment, town square's down the road. What am I going to use it for?
If you're sitting in your apartment, do you know what you're going to be doing, or are you bored?
I'm bored. I'm bored a lot.
You're bored.
I have a podcast. Of course I'm bored.
That's absolutely fair. So you're bored. You find out that your city's on Urality. You check out the webpage. Based on your location, we're going to provide you anything that you can do within a 15-minute walk. We're going to provide you with any sort of outdoor activities that you can participate in, any specials that local businesses are running, maybe a happy hour, maybe a quizzo, that sort of thing. It's really meant to be a engine for the community to amplify and get the word out of what's going on. So that's how we get you off your ass and out of your house, out of your apartment, and get you more active in the community.
I think that's really important. But obviously, we're coming out of a pandemic, and people haven't been out in their communities for 2 years. So it's really simple things that I think will be very important. Like you said, we were getting into some really technical stuff with the AR projections of placemaking, which is awesome in my opinion. But there's also this very important first step of just getting people out of their apartments and into their community and like giving a crap about their community.
Yeah, a note on that. 2020 happened. We all experienced it, but about 2 or 3 months into the initial pandemic, there was this overwhelming sense that I got from a lot of people that it was the first time that they were spending any amount of time in their communities, because people really contracted their mobility. They weren't taking trips other places. They were really experiencing their communities for the first time, which is insane to think about, because you're moving from this model of just constantly moving yourself from one place to another, like a 45-minute commute to my job and back. And the only time I spend near my community is on the weekends and I'm with my family. Guess what? You have all these different ways to interact with your place now. And so I think it's become more important for people to have an understanding of what's going on. And the tools right now at the local level, okay, I'm part of a Facebook group. There's lots of fun things that come along with a Facebook group, right? You have lots of people with their opinions and toxicity that I don't necessarily want to deal with. My favorite story about a Facebook group, and I know that this is a podcast, but I have to say it anyway. This woman wanted a recommendation for a urologist because she had a UTI. And I'm thinking to myself, do you have no shame? Do you want to be talking about that in a public forum anyway? And then you have like next door where people are talking about the kids driving down or riding their bikes on the street, popping wheelies and neighborhood fireworks and stuff like that. I just think that there's a place for the civil discourse from the standpoint of what's happening, what's available, how to be active and be part of the community. And that's the hole that we're trying to fill.
Yeah. And bringing up the social media pieces is interesting because social media came about primarily through the kind of news feed and post format, the Facebook format, and now Nextdoor as well. But there's other ways to do social media that maybe take away, because it's like, what's the most toxic part about Facebook? It's that you can be anonymous and just throw these bombs and never feel any repercussions. But what if you centered this social media around actual real places, took all the best parts,
Right.
the connectivity parts, and then, but now you have to be face to face, and it's like, okay, maybe I won't talk about my UTI in front of this person.
Maybe not. And there is something to be said for the proximity side of it, to actually see things that are happening and to have your neighbors post pictures of what they find interesting about the places that you are or that you're in. I think that is it's a different model. It's not social media as it stands today, but I think that having an outlet for those sorts of things can really grow a community and the loyalty to that community, even if it's just focused on taking vanity pics of the community. That still gives people a better sense of their place and how awesome it is.
That's a nice quote right there. Vanity pics of their community.
Have you seen, so most, okay, small aside, a lot of the folks that I work with are community managers or organizers. They are not photographers. They are not videographers. And it would be really nice to see a community be able to provide some of that skill back into the community and give that back to the community. So those organizers can use that content in a way that shows the community off in a good light.
Yeah, like why should a town of 20,000 people have to shell out for a professional photographer when like hundreds of people are taking these beautiful pictures?
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. It's kind of like crowdsourced tourism, generation or tourism board, that kind of thing.
Tourism is it's not a dirty word because there's a place for it, but I think instead of tourism, I think about authenticity. And the best way to get authentic is local. A lot of the folks that I work with, it's really, instead of a lot of towns focus on visitors and getting visitors in the door and making sure that there's enough parking, that sort of BS, right? If they did any amount of catering to the locals and listening to what the locals want, the visitors would flock there because it's going to be an awesome place and people are going to want to move there and spend their money there. So that's important.
Yeah, like you can't really keep the lid on an awesome place for too long in the internet age. Like you said, build a great place. Don't worry about we'll put air quotes now, tourism, potential dirty word. Yeah. I've already learned a few things are dirty words just having this podcast. So we have accident is a dirty word. Now tourism.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm gonna have like a board, cross them off. Yeah, very cool, very cool. Okay, we got a little bit more time left. I just want to open it up to you. Anything you think we haven't covered?
Oh man, there's so many things that I could talk about. Anyone who's in this world now is taking the responsibility to make sure that we do this in an accessible way, in an inclusive way, that gets the voices of everyone and doesn't disrupt any more public land. I think that's the nicest way of putting it. So there are a lot of urban...
What do you mean? What do you mean in this world? Do you mean in the world as in like the urbanist community in this world?
The earth. The earth. So here's a prime example. I think that even within the urbanist community, there is a lot of contention around, and I'll use the topic of EVs as the primary example, right? So EVs are a step in the right direction from an environmental perspective, but there are still a lot of problems with how you acquire the materials necessary to generate an EV. And I think everyone can agree on the fact that we don't want a future where an EV is a replacement for an internal combustion engine vehicle, right? We all want to see and we all, meaning urbanists, I think all urbanists want to see density. They want to see public transit. They want to see bike lifestyles over cars.
Yeah.
And so I really think that when we talk about this, we're not doing any. I think with everything in urbanism, nothing is revolutionary. I think we all want to see like incremental process. We all want everything overnight, but we know that's not going to happen. But I think everyone can agree that small wins is where we need to be right now. We may not like it, but I think that's what we have to take right now. And that's how movements start anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And the small wins is interesting because it's like we didn't achieve everything this year, but it's like we planted some seeds, and now people that are outside the movement, they see like just something like, let's just say like an expanded sidewalk. They're like, like my family member who is in a wheelchair now is just safer and is more free. That's cool. Like, why don't we have wider sidewalks everywhere? So these small wins do snowball, and they are very important.
I'm a huge fan of the tactical urbanism movement in general, and doing it on the cheap and doing small proof of concepts and being able to prove what a better end game would be, and getting that feedback from the public. There was one that just happened recently, a bike lane that was constructed in Portland, Oregon. And I know that I saw the whole thread on Twitter about it, and I think people were really excited about, number one, having a bike lane on that street, but then somebody hopped in and created a ramp to get onto the bus from the curb. And that's like a layer on top of that. And it was built out of plywood, and they painted it up and marked it up so it made sense with the rest of the project. But the fact that they took the initiative to do that and go through the paces of that, that's really when government's working properly. I hope they saw that and they said, okay, this made sense. We should install something more permanently.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yep.
And maybe if more governments are using Urality, they'll get that input.
We want our communities to take the opportunity to get that, to gather and collect that input from their citizens, and to have a platform where they can to do all of that work instead of them trying to roll it on their own, which is what a lot of these places are doing. And it might be a Google form. It doesn't have media attached to it. It doesn't have a map to show like actual locations. That's where we shine in that. We want to be able to tell the story at that place and show all that stuff all in one collective story.
Okay, that was Justin Copenhaver, founder of Urality, the digital placemaking app. Check it out at www.urality.com. That's urality.com. If you enjoyed this conversation, I invite you to join the Olmsted Slack channel. We have an active community covering a wide variety of urbanist issues, from bike lanes to zoning battles to micromobility to urban air pollution. Justin's a member, and so are over 180 other passionate folks who want to make cities work better for humans and the planet. Check it out at www.olmsted.city. That's www.olmsted.city. Hope to see you on there.